We'd really been left in the dark for the past few weeks when it came to polling out of Nevada, with the most recent poll having been released all the way back in early January. Fortunately, though, the Las Vegas Review-Journal is here to end this period of darkness, releasing a new poll which shows Bernie Sanders up at the top. So you can see here Bernie Sanders at 25%, Joe Biden 18%, Elizabeth Warren 13%, Tom Steyer 11%, Pete Buttigieg 10%, Klobuchar 10%, other and undecided 13%. Now, part of the reason why that other and undecided number is so is such a big number is that this poll was kind of conducted in between New Hampshire, so sort of a little bit before and a little bit after. And as you know, there were a number of candidates who actually dropped out after New Hampshire, most notably Andrew Yang, unfortunately, left the race. Now, the thing I do want to talk a little bit about when it comes to this poll is, one of the sort of narratives which we've been, one of, I guess, the debates which progressives have been sort of having more recently is whether or not caucuses are really going to be, I guess, as good for Bernie Sanders this time around as they were last time around. So if you remember what happened out in Iowa, when you compare the first alignment to the second alignment vote, Bernie Sanders didn't pick up nearly as many votes compared to a more moderate candidate like Pete Buttigieg. And so the thought is, while yes, so the sort of argument that some progressives are now making is that while yes, caucuses provide the opportunity for a more energizing candidate like Bernie Sanders to, raise turnout, and, it's really, really important to have an exciting candidate when it comes to a caucus. Maybe some of that energy, momentum, whatever you want to call it, is kind of canceled out when you have a very large field because, a lot of the more moderate candidates might coalesce. Of course, the meme, I think this was run on the mainstream media. I'm actually not entirely sure where this photo was come from, but a bunch of moderates were touting this one. Let me move my face so you can see here. Bernie Sanders showing here at 26% and then putting the moderates here at 53%, as if Bernie Sanders is facing a three-way, has to face all of them up at once. Now, anyway, what I do want to say, though, is that very well may be true, that theory that, Bernie Sanders, or at least the idea that caucuses may not have the same level of effect that they will. The sort of response, though, that we hear to that argument is, well, look, that may have been the case out in Iowa, but it's not going to be the case in Nevada anymore because, if you actually look at Elizabeth Warren's polling now, she isn't polling nearly where she was out in Iowa. And so, Elizabeth Warren having really taken a nosedive, especially with her terrible, honestly, just terrible showing out in New Hampshire, coming in fourth. I mean, that is not where you want to show up, especially when it's New Hampshire and you're from Massachusetts, a neighboring state. Definitely not where she wanted to show up at. And so the thought is that, well, look, Elizabeth Warren is going down in the polls, and so there's going to be a lot more precincts out in Nevada where Elizabeth Warren supporters will be able to go over to Bernie Sanders, because one of the things which we saw out in Iowa was, of course, that Elizabeth Warren, I mean, you can see here Warren having bounced back 1.7% from the first to second alignment, so she was picking up supporters. But one of the other things which we saw was out in Iowa, there were a lot of precincts where Elizabeth Warren supporters were viable, but maybe barely viable. And so those voters may not have been able to go over to Senator Sanders. Now, the reason why this is obviously a response to that argument is that if you look here at the Morning Consult poll, you see here Warren supporters have 30, let me make this a little bit bigger so you'll be able to see it. Warren supporters, 35% of them say that Bernie Sanders is their second choice, by far the largest sort of second choice option. And so the thought, of course, is that with Elizabeth Warren falling off in the polls, it's quite possible that, a lot more of those supporters are not just going to be able to coalesce around Bernie Sanders when it comes to the first alignment vote, but also in the second alignment vote, a lot more supporters, Bernie Sanders might be able to pick up a lot more. Obviously, this is just something that we're going to have to see how, just sort of see how caucuses play out for Bernie Sanders this time around. It's not altogether clear yet. I don't know that it might be too early to just look at Iowa data and say, oh, caucuses are no longer, sort of super Bernie advantage in the way that they were in 2016. But regardless, if you actually look at the head-to-head matchups between the various candidates, you can see here Bernie Sanders actually beats everyone right now. Bernie Sanders 48-44 against Joe Biden, 44-42 against Elizabeth Warren, 53-38 against Michael Bloomberg. My goodness, Michael Bloomberg is just trying to buy this election, and I'm not a fan of him right now, if I ever was. Bernie Sanders 54-37, Pete Buttigieg, and 54-33 against Amy Klobuchar. To be fair, some of this here between Klobuchar and Buttigieg probably is name recognition. Bloomberg, I'm not really sure. I mean, at this point, I feel like everyone has seen an ad for Michael Bloomberg. I mean, literally every YouTube video I click on, any TV channel I watch, it's just Bloomberg, Bloomberg all day long. But you know, I mean, this number here especially, I think, is really the most interesting number, with Bernie Sanders beating out Joe Biden in head to head. So you know, we're really starting to see the tides of things really change. And if you go here to the Nevada, you can clearly see Bernie Sanders is surging, because obviously this here is I mean, again, we haven't really seen a whole lot of polls, but the fact that if you look here, previously Biden was +1, and then the previous polls had showed Biden significantly up, we can just see in general the trend is clearly plus for Bernie Sanders. The question, of course, is how are those alignment votes going to be done? And now, unfortunately, though, to the best of my knowledge, I don't believe that Nevada is going to be reporting the sort of first alignment, second alignment, etc. numbers. We're just going to get those final numbers, so we won't really be able to look at it in the same way that we were able to look at it when it came to Iowa. And then the last thing I do just want to quickly talk to you about, if you actually look here at the age demographics here, you can see here 18 to 24 years old with only 5%, and 25-34, and then 11%, with over 75 being 12%, and 65 to 74 being 23%. It's very possible that this poll actually very well may sort of undersample younger voters than what we might ultimately expect. I mean, as we know, Bernie Sanders absolutely kills it when it comes to younger voters. In fact, in New Hampshire, voters under 30, when it came to voters under 30, Bernie Sanders got more votes than all the other candidates combined. So Bernie Sanders is really, really good when it comes to younger voters. And, when it comes to the caucus, even if we do think that some of the advantage of getting out supporters is canceled out by second alignment votes, Bernie Sanders is going to be able to bring out more younger voters, at least for the first alignment. And so I do think that it's quite possible that Bernie Sanders is even ahead when it comes to this poll. I wouldn't call it the highest quality poll. One of the things that you do want to look at when it comes to polling is the size of their, brackets, because I mean, everyone always talks about undersampling younger voters, and that's true, but sometimes what they do is they expand the size of the bracket in order to have a statistically significant sample of a particular age group, and that can, have issues, because 18 to 21-year-old voters or 18 to 22-year-old voters are actually quite different than sort of 23 to 25 or 26, and so sometimes they'll collapse those two demographics together, because, the younger side is more so in college, and so their voter turnout is a lot different. In any case, what I'm saying is really the size of the brackets is actually one of the best indicators to tell, if you're just quickly looking at it. Obviously, you want to dig the numbers a bit closer. The size of the brackets are actually a pretty good indicator, and they're not terrible brackets, but especially when it comes to this younger age, I would separate out the ages a little bit different than they did here. In any case, I just wanted to show you that poll, talk a little bit about it, and again here, Bernie Sanders up at the top. So anyway, if you like the video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.